Iran, China, and Russia simply will not join that consensus when they do not perceive the problem as a threat to their narrow national interests. Instead, they exercise their veto or threat of a veto to thwart effective and timely response. The Security Council remains a very valuable forum, but not an indispensable one. We can't walk away from a problem because some members of the Security Council refuse to act. In those instances where the veto power of either China or Russia impede the world's ability to deal with a significant threat, it is the United States that will have to organize and lead coalitions, with or without Security Council resolutions. And this concept, by the way, is neither novel nor partisan. President Clinton acted exactly in this way in Kosovo, with the support of congressional leaders like Senator Lieberman. Everywhere we look, we are presented with opportunities for American leadership to help shape a better world in this new century. And we have to view these opportunities through the context of the fact that in every region of the world, other countries look apprehensively at the growing influence of newly emerging powers in their midst and look to the U.S. to counterbalance them. In some instances, these emerging strategic realignments are not inevitably destined for conflict. For example, if China chooses to conform its rise to the international order, there is much to be hopeful for in the Pacific region. On the other hand, there is no reason for optimism about Iranian designs or regional dominance in the Middle East. And it's indeed in that region where multilateral cooperation is most urgently needed right away. Whether in bringing an end to the bloodshed and the Assad tyranny in Syria, or in helping Egypt overcome economic hardships and move towards the establishment of a true democracy, or in addressing the threat posed by nuclear Iran, America shouldn't try to solve any of these problems alone. But neither will any of these challenges be addressed without strong and creative American leadership. No other nation has the influence, relationships, or the reputation for seeking lasting solutions to intractable problems than the United States has. Iran's nuclear ambitions, by the way, are more than just weapons. Iran wants to become the dominant power in the Middle East. But given Iran's history of human rights abuses, fomenting sectarian conflict, and sponsorship of terrorism as a tool of statecraft, the world must never allow that to happen. Fortunately, preventing a dominant Iran is a goal we share with virtually every other nation in the region. Now, certainly, we welcome Russia and China's cooperation in facing this challenge, but the prospect of a nuclear-capable Iran is so unacceptable that we must be prepared to act, with or without them. And we have a host of willing partners in every region of the world who share our concerns and are relying on our leadership to compel Iran to abandon its ambitions. Now, preferably, we can succeed through coercive means short of military force. We should be open to negotiations with Iran, but always remember that they should not be deemed a success when they only lead to further negotiations. Stronger pressure shouldn't be postponed, and the expectation of our forbearance will encourage Iran to act in good faith. Nothing in our experience with Iran suggests that it considers such gestures anything other than a lack of resolve on our part. Ultimately, however, we must remember that their ambitions so far have come with a high tolerance for pain. Therefore, even as we work through the United Nations and with the international community on sanctions and on negotiations, we should operate on a dual track. We should also be preparing our allies and the world for the uncomfortable reality that, unfortunately, if all else fails, preventing a nuclear Iran may tragically require a military solution. The goal of preventing a dominant Iran is so important that every regional policy we adopt should be crafted with that overriding goal in mind. The current situation in Syria is an example of such an approach. The fall of Assad would be a significant blow to Iran's ambitions. On those grounds alone, we should be seeking to help the people of Syria bring him down. But on the Foreign Relations Committee, I've noticed that some members are so concerned about the challenges of a post-Assad Syria that they've lost sight of the advantages of it. First, Iran would lose its ally and see its influence and ability to cause trouble in the region would be correspondingly reduced. But Hezbollah would lose its most important ally too, along with its weapons supplier. And the prospects for a more stable, peaceful and freer Lebanon would improve. Secondly, the security of our ally, the strongest and most and shared value and affection would improve as well. And so would the prospects for peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Finally, the nations in the region see Syria as a test of our continued willingness to lead in the Middle East. If we prove unwilling to provide leadership, they will conclude that we are no longer a reliable security partner, and they will decide to take matters into their own hands. And that means a regional arms race, the constant threat of armed conflict, and crippling fuel prices here at home due to the instability. The most powerful and influential nation in the world cannot ask smaller, more vulnerable nations to take risks while we stand on the sidelines. We have to lead because the rewards of effective leadership are so great. Forming and leading a coalition with Turkey and the Arab League nations to assist the opposition by creating a safe haven and equipping the opposition with food, medicine, communication tools, and potentially weapons will not only weaken Iran, it will ultimately increase our ability to influence the political environment of a post-Assad Syria. The spread and success of political and economic freedom in the Middle East is in our vital interest, and it will certainly present challenges as newly enfranchised societies elect leaders whose views and purposes oppose and even offend ours. But in the long term, because governments that rule by the consent of the governed must be responsive to the material needs and demands of their people, they are less likely to engage in costly confrontations that harm their economies and deprive their people of the opportunity to improve their circumstances. The expansion and success of political and economic freedom is critical to our interests in every region of the world, and nowhere more so than in our own hemisphere. It's no coincidence that the rise of economic prosperity in the Western Hemisphere is directly related or directly coincides with the democratic gains of the previous 2 decades. Mexico, Peru, and Colombia are 3 examples of nations that have weathered the global economic downturn in a stronger position than ever. Our goal for our region should be pretty straightforward. Our coalition of neighboring democratic nations that trade freely and live peacefully with one another. Other than overcoming our own past indifference and the lack of focus on this goal, there are 2 other challenges. The first is Venezuela and the other ALBA countries, whose overt anti-Americanism. Now, they make a lot of noise, and we can't ignore their anti-democratic abuses or their growing closeness to Iran. But our greater challenge really is a second and more subtle one, and that's the effort of some nations to replace our influence with their influence, and to use protectionism and unfair practices to pursue that aim. The antidote for both of these problems is to re-engage energetically in the region. First, we must be a clear and consistent advocate for freedom. And to be free isn't just limited to elections. It's a way of governance. In Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and Ecuador, elected leaders have used their power to undermine fundamental freedoms by attacking the press, the courts, and their political opponents. Second, we need to commit to being a reliable partner as our neighbors cope with significant security challenges. Both Mexico and Colombia, they need our continued commitment to win their respective wars against criminal organizations. And we must also make it abundantly clear that we will not tolerate Iran exporting violence and terrorism to our hemisphere. Third, we must reject protectionism and instead embrace the ultimate goal of a free trade area of the Americas. The recently approved free trade agreements with Colombia and Panama was a good step. We need to move forward to bring both Canada and Mexico into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And fourth, we should move aggressively to form a strong energy partnership with Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, and a post-Chavez Venezuela. A stable Western Hemisphere, displacing an unstable Middle East and an increasingly belligerent Russia as the center of the world's energy production, would create countless jobs for Americans and energy security for the world. In Asia, the question of whether China's rise will be peaceful and respectful of their neighbors is one of our biggest long-term challenges. But we must make it abundantly clear that we are firmly committed to our defense agreements and firmly committed to our allies to the freedom of navigation on our seas. And the growing strategic importance of Asia actually heightens, not diminishes, the importance of Europe. U.S.-European cooperation is a valuable complement to our work with our East Asia allies. See, all of us, Asians, Americans, Europeans, have a common interest in seeing China evolve in a peaceful and democratic direction. And we have a common interest in seeing China abide by the rules of the international economic order. The United States, Europe, and East Asia represent 71% of the world's economy. That's a lot of leverage. We should use it to address problems such as China's disregard for intellectual property rights, gross human rights violations, its unfair trade practices, its currency manipulation, and the looming presence of China's state-owned industries. In addition, this U.S.-EU partnership is critical to a more realistic approach to Russia. I know some here might disagree, and certainly the President would, but I feel like we've gotten precious little from Russia in return for concessions on nuclear weapons. The reason is because Russia's domestic politics shape its foreign policies. An autocratic Russia tends to be more anti-Western and to act in ways that make it harder to integrate Russia into the global community and the free international order. Now, Putin may talk tough, but he knows he's weak. Everywhere he looks, he sees threats to his rule, real and imagined. And so he uses state-owned media to preach paranoia and anti-Western sentiments to Russians. He faces